Clara's voice was a shard of ice in the sterile warmth of the lawyer's office. "Sign it, Liam, or you will never see the children again." She thought the words were a hammer, a final crushing blow to the man she had once promised to love. She thought she was ending a chapter. She had no idea she was ending her world. Liam looked from the sheaf of papers, a testament to 10 years of shared life, now reduced to a list of assets to be surrendered, to his wife's cold, determined face. He then glanced at her father, Richard, who stood by the window, a statue of smug satisfaction, his reflection beaming back from the glass of the high-rise office building. They were so confident, so utterly, fatally sure of their power. What they didn't know was that the pen Liam held was mightier than their entire family fortune, and the judge who would oversee this final act was not a stranger. Within 48 hours, the empire Richard had built would be a ruin. Clara's social standing would be a ghost, and the man they were trying to erase would be the only one left with the power to save them. And that's the moment we're going to dive into today. I know stories like this can hit close to home, and I'm so glad you're here to see this one through. If you love stories where patience and integrity win the day, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't want to miss what's coming. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back 72 hours to the dinner that started it all. The scent of roasted rosemary and garlic, a smell that had once meant home and comfort to Liam, now felt like a prelude to an execution. He sat at the long, polished mahogany table in Richard and Eleanor's dining room, the crystal glasses gleaming under the low-hung chandelier like a row of accusing eyes. It was their weekly family dinner, a ritual Richard insisted upon, a way to keep his domain in order. Tonight, however, the air was different. It was thick with a tension so profound it seemed to dampen the sound of silverware on porcelain. Across from him, Clara was a portrait of brittle elegance, her smile a thin, painted line. She hadn't looked him in the eye for a week. Beside her, her father, Richard Thorne, held court. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, his authority as carefully curated as the vintage wine he was swirling in his glass. "The market's volatile," Richard announced, his voice a low rumble of self-importance. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but his gaze swept over Liam with a dismissive flicker. "It takes a certain kind of man to navigate it, a man with vision, a man who isn't afraid to make bold moves." He took a deliberate sip of wine, his eyes still locked on his son-in-law. "It's about building something that lasts, an empire, a legacy, not tinkering with blueprints for suburban bungalows." The jab was as subtle as a thrown brick. Liam, an architect, felt the familiar sting. For 10 years he had endured these condescending remarks. He had learned to absorb them, to let them pass through him without reaction. He had a family to protect, a life he was trying to build, and he had believed, for a long time, that love could shield him from the acid of his father-in-law's disapproval. He looked at his own hands, resting calmly on the white linen napkin in his lap. They were capable hands. They had designed hospitals that saved lives, community centers that brought people together, and yes, homes where families found shelter and made memories. He had never felt the need to boast about his accomplishments. His work spoke for itself, even if the only people listening in this room were deaf to its language. Clara shifted in her seat, the silk of her dress whispering against the chair. "Daddy, Liam's firm is doing very well. They just won that local library renovation." Her defense was weak, almost apologetic, as if she were embarrassed to even offer it. It was worse than no defense at all. It painted him as small, local, provincial. Richard laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of any real humor. "A library? Wonderful. How many thousands was that worth, Liam? 50? 60? He waved a dismissive hand. "My point is about scale, about impact. I closed a deal this morning that will reshape the entire logistics corridor on the West Coast. We're talking about a 9-figure investment. We're talking about legacy. He leaned forward, his polished cufflinks glinting. What's your legacy going to be, Liam? A well-organized card catalog? The table fell silent. Eleanor, Clara's mother, a woman who had faded into the background of her husband's life until she was little more than a beautifully upholstered piece of furniture, meticulously rearranged the peas on her plate. She was the silent enabler, the one whose failure to speak was its own form of violence. Her silence gave Richard's cruelty the space it needed to grow, to fester. Liam felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't anger, it was a profound and weary sadness. He looked at Clara, searching for a flicker of the woman he had married, the one who had once admired his passion for creating spaces that served people, not just profits. He found nothing. Her face was a mask of strained loyalty to the man with the money, the man with the power. Liam picked up his water glass, the condensation cool against his fingertips. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to crumble, to argue, to show some sign of weakness they could exploit. He would give them nothing. Inside his jacket pocket, his fingers brushed against the smooth leather of a small, unassuming notebook. It was a simple, unadorned object, but it contained sketches and figures that could buy and sell this entire mahogany-paneled world 10 times over. It was a symbol of his true self, the self he had kept hidden, not out of shame, but out of a desire for a normal life, a life he now realized had only ever been an illusion. He placed the glass back on the table with a soft, final click. He met Richard's gaze, his own eyes clear and calm. "Legacy is an interesting concept, Richard," he said, his voice even and measured. "Some people build with steel and concrete. Others build with trust and integrity. It will be interesting to see which one stands the test of time." The words hung in the air, a quiet challenge that Richard, in his arrogance, completely missed. He simply heard a platitude, the weak philosophizing of a man who couldn't compete. He chuckled and turned to carve the roast, the master of his domain, secure in his victory. But Clara heard something else. She heard a note of finality, a strange, unnerving confidence in Liam's voice she hadn't heard in years. It frightened her, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. Fear was an emotion for the powerless, and she was, and always would be, on the side of power. She had made her choice. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and clinking cutlery. Liam ate methodically, his mind 1,000 miles away. He was replaying a decade of similar dinners, of 1,000 tiny cuts that had bled his marriage dry. He thought of the family vacations he'd paid for, only to be mocked for choosing a 4-star resort instead of the 5-star Richard preferred. He remembered the birthdays and anniversaries where his thoughtful, personal gifts were met with polite, dismissive smiles before being put away, while Richard's extravagant, impersonal checks were celebrated. He recalled the parent-teacher conferences where his insights into his children's emotional well-being were ignored in favor of Richard's loud proclamations about which expensive tutors they needed to hire to get into the right schools. He had stayed for the children. That was the mantra he had repeated to himself year after year. He had endured the humiliation, the condescension, the slow erosion of his own identity because he loved his son, 8-year-old Leo, and his daughter, 6-year-old Maya. He loved their laughter, the way they smelled after a bath, the fierce, trusting grip of their small hands in his. He had convinced himself that a broken home was worse than an unhappy one. He was beginning to understand how wrong he had been. An unhappy home was a slow poison, and his children were drinking it in with every tense meal, every whispered argument they thought he and Clara couldn't hear. When the dessert plates were cleared, Richard leaned back, a satisfied patriarch surveying his kingdom. "Clara, darling, I think it's time you and Liam had a talk. There are things that need to be settled." It was an order, not a suggestion. Clara nodded, her face grim. "Yes, Daddy." She stood up, not looking at Liam. Liam, let's go into the study. Liam rose from his chair, folding his napkin neatly and placing it beside his plate. He met Eleanor's gaze for a brief moment. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pity? Guilt? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same placid emptiness she always wore. She would not help him. She had never helped him. He followed his wife out of the room, the sound of Richard's triumphant chuckle echoing behind them. The study was Richard's inner sanctum, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of leather and old paper. A large, imposing desk dominated the space, a throne from which Richard ruled his financial empire. On the polished surface of that desk lay a thick stack of documents, bound in a neat blue legal cover. Clara didn't waste time with pleasantries. She gestured to the papers. My father's lawyers drew these up. They are very generous under the circumstances. Liam stepped forward and picked up the document. Marital Settlement Agreement. He opened it, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. Generous was not the word he would have used. Brutal, punitive, total. He was to surrender the house, which his own money had been the primary source for its down payment and mortgage. He was to sign over his interest in their joint investment portfolio, a portfolio he had meticulously managed and grown. His own modest savings account was to be split, despite it containing funds from a premarital inheritance. And custody, the words leaped off the page. Clara would have sole physical and legal custody of Leo and Maya. He would be granted supervised visitation, twice a month, at her discretion. He looked up from the papers, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Clara, this is insane. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. This is what's happening, Liam. My father has been telling me for years that you were holding me back. I didn't want to believe it, but he's right. Look at you. Look at us. This isn't a partnership. It's a liability. I'm done. A liability? The word was so cold, so clinical. I'm your husband. I'm the father of your children. And you will continue to be their father, she said, though her tone suggested it was a biological fact she was forced to tolerate. But their lives, their future, will be secured by my family. We will give them the world, Liam, a world you could never provide, the best schools, the right connections, a life without limits. All you have to do is get out of the way. The sheer audacity of it left him breathless. The cruelty was so casual, so complete. He thought of all the nights he'd stayed up with a sick child, all the school projects he'd helped build, all the stories he'd read, all the scraped knees he'd bandaged. All of it erased, reduced to a financial calculation. He let the papers fall back onto the desk. I won't sign this. No court would uphold this, Clara. It's punitive, and it's not in the best interest of the children. A flicker of anger, the first real emotion he'd seen from her all night, flashed in her eyes. Don't you dare talk to me about the children's best interest. Their best interest is to be with me, with my family, in a stable, secure environment. Not with a man who thinks designing a public library is the pinnacle of success. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. You will sign it, because if you don't, if you try to fight me, I will drag you through the mud. My father has the best lawyers in the state. They will paint you as an unfit father. They will use every little thing, every argument, every frustration. We have more money, more power, more influence than you could ever imagine. We will bury you, Liam, and by the time we're done, you'll be lucky to see your children on their birthdays. Is that what you want? He stared at her, the woman he had loved, and saw a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger molded in her father's image. And in that moment, he knew his marriage was not just over. It had been a mirage all along. Sign it, Liam, she repeated, her voice now a shard of ice. Or I take the kids. He looked at the papers, then back at her face, and a profound, chilling clarity settled over him. He saw the path ahead. He saw the chessboard, and for the first time, he wasn't just a pawn. He was a player, and he knew a move she and her father could never anticipate. He picked up the document again, his movements slow and deliberate. He felt the weight of it in his hands, the weight of their arrogance. He met her triumphant gaze with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't defeat. It was something else entirely. Something calm. Something final. He thought about the small notebook in his pocket. He thought about the name on the incorporation documents filed in a different country, a name no one in this family had ever bothered to investigate. Ethelred Consortium. It sounded like something out of a history book. Ancient, strong, unbreakable, and it was all his. He let out a long, slow breath. "All right, Clara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You win." Her face flooded with relief and a predatory glint of victory. She had broken him. She had finally, definitively won. Or so she thought. Liam continued, "I'll sign your papers, but I have one condition." Clara's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What condition?" she snapped, ready for a last-ditch attempt at negotiation, a final, pathetic plea. "It's a small thing," Liam said, his voice disarmingly calm. "I don't want to do this here, in this office, like some back-alley deal. This is the end of our marriage. It deserves a shred of dignity." He paused, letting the word dignity hang in the air, a concept so foreign to the current proceedings. "I want the signing to be formalized, in a judge's chambers. I want it on the record, clean and final." Clara stared at him. This was not the demand she was expecting. She had anticipated a fight over a piece of furniture, a sentimental painting, a few $1,000s. This was procedural. It was a request for decorum from a man he had just stripped of all dignity. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. She glanced at her father, who had been listening from the doorway, a silent, looming presence. Richard stepped into the room, a smirk playing on his lips. "A judge's chambers?" Richard scoffed. "What, you want an audience for your surrender, Liam? Want to make it feel important?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Fine. If a little pomp and circumstance is what you need to accept the inevitable, then by all means, we can arrange that. It changes nothing. The document is ironclad." He saw it as the final, pathetic flourish of a defeated man, a meaningless request that only highlighted his own power to grant it. Clara, taking her cue from her father, relaxed. Of course, it was just another way for Liam to feel like he had some control, some say in his own destruction. It was pathetic, and it suited their narrative perfectly. "Fine," she agreed. "A judge's chambers it is. Any particular judge you have in mind, or will anyone do?" The question was a taunt. Here, Liam paused. This was the most critical move. He had to make it seem random, insignificant. He feigned a moment of thought, rubbing his chin. "There was a judge. She spoke at a university lecture I attended a few years ago, on contract law and intellectual property in architecture. I was very impressed. Reed, I think her name was. Judge Evelyn Reed. I'm sure her docket is busy, but if it's possible, I'd prefer someone with her reputation for thoroughness." Richard shrugged. "Reed, I've heard the name. Tough but fair, they say. My lawyers know her clerk. It can be arranged." To Richard and Clara, the choice was arbitrary. A name plucked from a vague memory. They had no idea that Judge Evelyn Reed was one of the 3 trustees of the Ethelred Consortium's North American Philanthropic Foundation. They had no idea that she and Liam had met not at a university lecture, but in a series of discreet, high-level board meetings over the last 5 years. They had no idea that the thoroughness Liam admired was the same thoroughness she had applied when helping him structure the multi-billion-dollar trust fund he had established for his children. A trust designed to be untouchable by marital disputes or corporate predators. "Thank you," Liam said, his voice laced with a convincing imitation of grateful humility. That would be acceptable. Good, Clara said, turning to leave the study, the divorce papers held in her hand like a trophy. My lawyer will be in touch to schedule it. Pack a bag, Liam. I want you out of the house by tomorrow morning. Liam simply nodded. He didn't go back to the living room. He walked out of the study, past the dining room where Eleanor was directing the staff to clear the table, and straight out the front door into the cool night air. He didn't look back. As he walked down the long, manicured driveway, the oppressive weight of the Thorne mansion seemed to lift from his shoulders. He felt a strange sense of lightness. The war was not over. The war had just begun, and they had just willingly, eagerly handed him his battlefield of choice. The next 48 hours were a study in controlled, quiet motion. Liam packed a single suitcase, his movements precise and unhurried. He took only his clothes and personal effects. He paused in the doorway of his children's rooms, watching them sleep. Leo, with his dark hair so like his own, and Maya, whose determined little chin was a perfect echo of her mother's. A wave of pain, sharp and visceral, washed over him. This was the cost, this temporary separation, but it was a necessary pain, a surgeon's cut to remove a cancer. He was not abandoning them. He was fighting for them in the only way he now could. He left a small, hand-carved wooden bird on each of their nightstands, a silent promise that he would be back. He checked into a modest, elegant hotel in the city center. It was a far cry from the sprawling, empty house he had just left, but it was peaceful. From his room, he made 2 calls. The first was to his lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, no relation to Richard, a fact of cosmic irony that always made Liam smile. Marcus was not a flashy family lawyer. He was a quiet, brilliant corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers and complex international arbitration. Marcus, it's happening, Liam said, his voice low. The Thorne gambit? Marcus's voice was calm, unsurprised. I assume the terms were as predatory as we predicted. Worse, Liam replied, but they took the bait. We're in Judge Reed's chambers, day after tomorrow, 10 a.m. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Marcus chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. Liam, you are a patient, patient man. You've let them build their own gallows for a year. It's almost poetic. The files are ready. The Athelred disclosure, the Thorne Industries analysis, the Children's Trust documentation, everything. I'll see you there. Wear your good suit, the one you hate because it looks too expensive. The second call was shorter. It was to a number in Zurich. A man with a crisp Swiss-German accent answered on the first ring. Mr. Sterling, he said, using Liam's operational pseudonym. Klaus, Liam said. Execute Protocol Helios. At once, Mr. Sterling. The inquiries into Thorne Industries credit lines will begin within the hour. Their primary lender will be receiving our preliminary offer for their distressed debt portfolio by morning. Is the timing still critical? To the minute, Liam said. I want their financial world to start shaking at precisely 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday, not before. Consider it done, Klaus replied. Good luck, Liam. He hung up the phone and looked out the window at the sprawling city lights. Each light was a life, a story. For years, he had tried to keep his 2 worlds separate. The world of Liam Collins, the quiet architect and family man, and the world of Mr. Sterling, the anonymous, visionary founder of the Athelred Consortium, one of the most powerful and secretive architectural and engineering firms on the planet. He had built his company under a shield of anonymity because he never wanted the money or the power to define him. He wanted to be loved for the man he was, not the wealth he possessed. The irony was devastating. The one person he had wanted to see him, truly see him, had only ever been able to see what he lacked. Meanwhile, in the Thorne mansion, there was a sense of celebration. Clara, buoyed by her victory, was on the phone with her friends, her voice dripping with faux sympathy for her own situation. "It's just so hard," she sighed. "But I have to do what's best for the children. Liam is a good man, but he just doesn't have the drive, the ambition. We're just on different paths." Richard was in his study, a glass of his finest scotch in hand. He was on the phone with his lawyer. "Yes, everything is signed, sealed, and delivered. Or it will be on Wednesday." He folded like a cheap suit. "No, no fight at all. Just ask for it to be in front of a judge. Read." "Yeah, I know. Probably wants to tell his grandkids he had his day in court." He laughed. "Now about this Athelred deal. Any word?" "I'm telling you, landing this contract for the new global headquarters will be the capstone of my career. It would solve all our little cash flow problems and then some. I just need to get in the room with their CEO. This Mr. Sterling is impossible to reach. A ghost." He had no idea that the ghost he was chasing was the same man he had just kicked out of his house. The dramatic irony was so thick, it was practically a character in the room. The trap was set. The pieces were all in motion. All that was left was the quiet before the storm. Liam spent the next day in the city's main art museum, wandering through galleries filled with the masterpieces of ages. He found a strange comfort in their silent, enduring beauty. He sketched in his notebook, not buildings but the faces of people, the play of light on a marble statue, the intricate pattern of a Persian rug. He was centering himself, clearing his mind for the confrontation to come. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional act. This was about reestablishing order. It was about truth. It was about protecting the future of his children from the toxic influence of people who valued currency over character. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the city, Liam closed his notebook. He felt a profound sense of calm. He had been humiliated, threatened, and dismissed. He had been treated as nothing. And tomorrow, in the quiet, wood-paneled chambers of a judge they thought was a mere formality, they would finally learn that the man they thought was nothing was in fact everything. The morning of the signing dawned crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day. Liam chose his suit with care. It was a deep charcoal gray, exquisitely tailored but understated. It was the suit Marcus had mentioned, one he rarely wore because it felt like a costume. Today, it felt like armor. He did not eat breakfast. He drank a single cup of black coffee, his mind focused and sharp. He arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early, a slim leather briefcase in his hand. He didn't enter the building immediately. He stood on the wide stone steps, watching the flow of people, lawyers with their important strides, anxious citizens clutching documents, court officers with their weary professionalism. It was a theater of human drama, and he was about to take center stage. At 5 minutes to 10, he saw them arrive. Richard's gleaming black sedan pulled up to the curb. Richard got out first, looking powerful and imposing in his dark pinstripe suit. He exuded an air of ownership, as if the courthouse itself were merely an extension of his boardroom. Then Clara emerged. She was wearing a cream-colored dress, an outfit chosen to project an image of innocence and victimhood. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked at Liam standing on the steps, and a small, triumphant smile touched her lips. He was alone. He looked small against the grand columns of the courthouse. She walked towards him, her father a step behind, her own lawyer, a man with a perpetually sour expression named Abernathy, trailing them. "Liam," she said, her voice cool and businesslike, "are you ready?" "I am," he replied, his voice even. He met her eyes, and for a second, she saw that same unnerving calm she'd seen in the study. It gave her a momentary pause, a flicker of doubt, but it was quickly extinguished by her father's booming voice. "Let's get this over with," Richard said, clapping a hand on Clara's shoulder. "We have a lunch reservation at the club at noon. Time to celebrate a new beginning." He gave Liam a look that was pure condescension, a final dismissal. They walked into the courthouse together, a strange and silent procession. The marble halls echoed with the sound of their footsteps. They took the elevator to the third floor, to the private chambers of the judiciary. A clerk with a tired face checked their names and directed them down a quiet, carpeted hallway. The door at the end was heavy oak, with a simple brass plaque that read, "The Honorable Evelyn Reed." The clerk knocked, then opened the door. "They're here, Your Honor." The room was not a courtroom. It was an office, though a grand one. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with thick legal volumes. A large mahogany desk faced the door, and behind it sat Judge Evelyn Reed. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair that was more silver than gray. She was not smiling. Her expression was one of measured neutrality. She gestured to the two chairs in front of her desk. "Please be seated," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. Clara and Liam sat. Richard, ever the dominant presence, chose to stand, positioning himself behind his daughter's chair like a guard. Abernathy stood beside him, clutching his briefcase. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Judge Reed looked at the file on her desk. "We are here to witness and notarize the signing of a marital settlement agreement between Mr. Liam Collins and Miss Clara Thorne Collins. I have reviewed the document. It is comprehensive." The way she said the word comprehensive held a subtle, almost imperceptible edge. Liam heard it. Clara and Richard, wrapped in their bubble of arrogance, did not. "We believe it is a fair and equitable dissolution of the marriage, Your Honor," Abernathy piped up, his voice reedy. Judge Reed's eyes flicked to him, and he seemed to shrink a little under her gaze. "Fairness is a subjective measure, Counselor. My role here, as requested, is simply to witness the signatures and ensure both parties are signing of their own free will, without coercion." Her eyes rested on Liam for a fraction of a second longer than they did on Clara. "We are ready, Your Honor," Clara said, eager to conclude the proceedings. "Very well." The judge slid the thick document across the desk. "Ms. Thorne Collins, you will sign first." Clara reached into her purse and produced a delicate silver pen. She signed her name with a flourish on the last page, her signature a confident upward slash. She pushed the document and her pen towards Liam. "Your turn." Liam looked at the silver pen, then at Clara's expectant face. He did not pick it up. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced his own pen. It was a simple, matte black fountain pen, heavy and solid in his hand. He uncapped it with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. He pulled the document towards him. He did not turn to the last page. He started on page 1. He read every line, his eyes moving slowly, methodically down the page. "Liam, what are you doing?" Clara asked, her voice tight with irritation. "Just sign the last page." "He's stalling," Richard muttered from behind her. "Let him have his little drama." Liam ignored them. He continued his slow, deliberate reading. When he reached the bottom of a page, he made a small, neat checkmark in the margin with his fountain pen. Page after page, the same process. The room grew tense. The ticking of the clock seemed to get louder. Clara fidgeted in her chair. Richard's confident posture began to stiffen with impatience. Only Judge Reed remained perfectly still, her hands folded on her desk, her eyes watching Liam with a look of intense, focused interest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Liam reached the final page, the signature page. He paused, his pen hovering over the line that read, "Liam Collins." He looked up not at Clara, but at Judge Reed. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the thick tension in the room. "Before I sign this document, which I am fully prepared to do, I believe there is a related matter that the court should be aware of. A matter of material disclosure that directly impacts the fair and equitable nature of this agreement." Abernathy took a half step forward. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a delaying tactic. The agreement is final. There are no more Matters to discuss. Judge Reed held up a hand, silencing him without raising her voice. Her gaze was fixed on Liam. What kind of matter, Mr. Collins? At that exact moment, there was a soft knock on the chamber door. The clerk opened it to reveal a man in a suit as sharp and well-tailored as Liam's. It was Marcus Thorne. He carried a briefcase identical to Liam's. He nodded respectfully to the judge. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, her voice even, you are punctual. Clara and Richard exchanged a confused look. Who was this man? Richard's eyes narrowed. Thorne, are you related to us? Marcus offered a thin, mirthless smile. A coincidence of nomenclature, I assure you. One I am quite certain you will soon regret. He walked to Liam's side and placed his briefcase on the floor. He didn't open it. Liam, what is this? Clara demanded, her voice rising in panic. The script was changing. This wasn't how her victory was supposed to play out. Liam looked at her, and for the first time she saw pity in his eyes. It was more terrifying than anger. Clara, he said softly, you and your father have made a number of assumptions. About me, about my career, about my finances. You've built this entire proceeding on those assumptions. I think it's time we corrected the record. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, my wife and her father believe my net worth to be negligible. They believe my career is a minor, local enterprise. This agreement is predicated on that belief. He then picked up his fountain pen and with a steady hand signed his name on the final page of the divorce agreement. The ink was a dark, definitive black. He capped his pen and placed it neatly beside the document. There, he said, I have signed it. Under the coercion and duress of losing access to my children, as my wife so clearly threatened. But I have signed it. He pushed the document back towards the center of the desk. Clara's face flooded with relief. It was done. He had signed. The rest was just noise. Good, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's over. No, Judge Reed said, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. It's just beginning. She looked at Liam. Mr. Collins, you mentioned a matter of material disclosure. The floor is yours. Liam nodded to Marcus. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a single, thick, spiral-bound report. He handed it to the judge. The cover read, Ethelred Consortium, Assets and Holdings Disclosure, Liam Collins, Sterling. Ethelred? Richard said, the name catching in his throat. He took a step forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. What does Ethelred have to do with this? Everything, Liam said. He stood up and for the first time, he seemed to fill the room. The quiet architect was gone, and in his place was someone else. Someone with an aura of immense, untapped power. You've been chasing a ghost, Richard. A Mr. Sterling. You've been desperate to get in a room with him, to beg him to award your failing company a contract to save you from bankruptcy. Richard went pale. How do you know about that? Liam gave a small, sad smile. Because I am Mr. Sterling. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound that the ticking of the clock sounded like a drumbeat. Clara stared at Liam, her mouth slightly agape. Her mind could not process the words. It was impossible. A joke. A lie. Liam? Her Liam? The man who got paint on his jeans. The man who was happy to spend a Saturday building a birdhouse? Mr. Sterling was a legend, a mythical figure in the world of global finance and development. He was a kingmaker. He was powerful. He was everything Liam wasn't. Richard was the first to break the silence, a strangled laugh escaping his lips. You? You're Sterling? Don't be ridiculous. This is a pathetic, desperate fantasy, Liam. You're a small-time architect who designs libraries. Judge Reed cleared her throat. She opened the report Marcus had given her. According to this verified and notarized statement of assets, Mr. Liam Collins, operating under the legal pseudonym Sterling for privacy purposes, is the sole founder and 100% shareholder of the Ethelred Consortium, a privately held global architecture, engineering, and development firm with a current valuation of, she paused, peering at the number, $74 billion. The number hung in the air, a weaponized planetoid of sound. 74 billion. It was a figure so vast, so incomprehensible, that it broke Richard's brain. He stumbled back a step, his hand going to his chest. He looked from the judge to Liam, his face a mask of utter, cataclysmic shock. Clara just shook her head, a frantic, repetitive motion. No, no, it's not true. It's a trick. It's forged documents. Liam, tell them. Tell them it's a lie. She was pleading with him now, her voice shrill with hysteria. She was pleading with the man she had just tried to ruin to save her from the truth. Liam's voice was gentle, but firm. It's not a lie, Clara. I started the company with the inheritance from my grandfather, the one you always called that little bit of money from the old farmer. I kept it quiet because I didn't want this. I didn't want the money to be who I was. I wanted a normal life. I wanted a wife and a family who loved me for me, not for a number in a bank account. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless sorrow. I see now that was a naive hope. Judge Reed turned a page in the report. It also seems, Mr. Collins, that you established a trust for your children, Leo and Maya Collins, 5 years ago. An irrevocable trust managed by myself and 2 other independent trustees. She looked directly at Clara and Richard. The current assets of that trust stand at $2 billion. It was funded with the initial profits from the Ethelred Consortium's first major international project. It is, by law, their property, not marital property, not part of any settlement. $2 billion. The number was smaller than the first, but somehow it was sharper, more personal. The money Richard had spent his life accumulating, the fortune he had leveraged to control his daughter and crush his son-in-law, was a rounding error in the trust fund of the grandchildren he barely knew. Marcus Thorne stepped forward again. He pulled a second document from his briefcase. And this, Your Honor, is a real-time analysis of Thorne Industries' financial position. He handed it to Richard. You might want to look at this, Richard, specifically page 4. The part about your primary creditor calling in your entire debt load after receiving a highly credible buyout offer this morning at 10:15 a.m. from an anonymous holding company. Richard's hands trembled as he took the report. He fumbled through the pages, his eyes scanning the text with frantic desperation. He found the page. He read the paragraph. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He looked up at Liam, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying understanding. The anonymous holding company. It was him, Liam. He hadn't just revealed his wealth. He had actively, strategically, and with surgical precision dismantled Richard's entire empire in the space of 15 minutes. You ruined me, Richard whispered, the words barely audible. The report slipped from his nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor. No, Richard, Liam said, his voice cold now, devoid of its earlier pity. You ruined yourself. You built your empire on debt and arrogance. You mistook liquidity for stability. You flew too close to the sun, and you never bothered to check who owned the sky. And then Clara finally broke. A choked, guttural sob escaped her lips. This was her new reality. The man she had discarded as worthless was one of the wealthiest men in the world. The father she had worshipped as all-powerful was a bankrupt old man. The future she had been promised was gone, and the document she had forced her husband to sign, the one that gave her everything, now gave her nothing. Less than nothing. It was a public record of her own greed and blindness. She looked at the settlement agreement sitting on the judge's desk. It was a death warrant for her old life. She looked at Liam, at his calm, powerful stillness. He was a stranger, a terrifying, magnificent stranger. He held all the cards. He had always held all the cards. And she had been so arrogant, so blind, she had never even realized they were playing a game. Judge Reed looked at the signed settlement agreement. She picked it up, holding it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. Given the gross material misrepresentation of financial status and the clear evidence of coercion presented here today, this agreement is worthless. She tore the document in half, the sound of ripping paper, a final, definitive judgment. She then tore it again. She dropped the pieces into the wastebasket beside her desk. It seems, counselors, that we will have to begin divorce and custody proceedings from scratch, based on the actual circumstances. Mr. Collins, she said, her voice softening slightly, I imagine your terms will be different this time. Liam nodded. They will be, Your Honor, but they will also be fair. My only concern is, and always has been, the well-being of my children. Clara was weeping openly now, her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. Liam, please, she whispered, the word a desperate plea for a mercy she did not deserve. I didn't know. I love you. The words which he had longed to hear for years now felt hollow, meaningless. No, Clara, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You don't love me. You never did. You loved the idea of what I could be for you, and when I didn't fit that idea, you tried to discard me. What you love right now is the idea of what my money can do for you, and that is a love I am no longer interested in. Richard, who had been slumped in a state of shock, suddenly found his voice, a last gasp of his former blustering self. This is a travesty, a conspiracy. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll take you to every court in the land. Marcus Thorne laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh this time. With what money, Richard? You'll be lucky if you can afford a bus pass by this time next week. The Aethelred Consortium's legal department has a budget larger than the GDP of a small country. I invite you to try. Please. My associates are excellent, but they are so very bored. The fight went out of Richard completely. He deflated, shrinking into himself until he looked like just an old man in an expensive, ill-fitting suit. He sank into the chair beside Clara, his head in his hands. The father and daughter, once titans of their small universe, were now just two broken people, shipwrecked on the shores of a reality they had refused to see. The judge looked at the clock on the wall. It appears, Mr. Thorne, she said to Richard, that you are going to be late for your lunch reservation. The situational irony was so stark, it was almost cruel. But there was no humor in it, only a profound and terrible justice. The meeting was over. The world had been turned upside down and shaken, and everything had landed exactly where it was supposed to. The days that followed were a blur of legal maneuvers and quiet negotiations. Liam, true to his word, was not vindictive. His primary concern was Leo and Maya. He moved quickly to secure a new home for them, a beautiful, light-filled house with a large garden, not far from their school. He hired a child psychologist to help them navigate the transition. He proposed a custody arrangement that was more than fair, joint legal custody, with him having primary physical custody to provide a stable environment, but with generous and open visitation for Clara. He wanted his children to have a mother, but he would not allow them to be used as pawns or to be raised in the toxic environment of entitlement and arrogance that had defined the Thorne household. The financial settlement was equally decisive. He did not take everything from Clara. He set up a trust for her, managed by an independent third party. It would provide her with a comfortable but not extravagant living. Enough to live on, but not enough to insulate her from the consequences of her choices. She would have to work. She would have to find a purpose. She would have to build a life for herself, something she had never done before. It was, in its own way, the kindest thing he could do for her. For Richard, there was no such soft landing. His company was unsalvageable. The Aethelred Consortium, through its holding company, acquired Thorn Industries' assets out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. Liam ordered the company to be restructured. He kept on the rank-and-file employees, improved their wages and benefits, but the entire senior management team, the sycophants and enablers who had propped up Richard's reign, were dismissed. Richard himself was left with nothing but his personal debts and the vast, empty mansion, which was soon put on the market to satisfy his creditors. Eleanor, after decades of silent complicity, finally found her voice. She left him. She moved into a small apartment and started volunteering at the local library, the same library Richard had once mocked. Clara had to face a world that no longer bowed to her. Her friends, the ones who had listened to her tales of woe about her unambitious husband, now avoided her calls. The invitations to society galas and charity balls stopped coming. She was no longer a thorn, heiress to a fortune. She was just Clara Collins, a divorcee living on a fixed income. She was forced to confront the person she was without the shield of her father's money and status. It was a painful, humbling process. One afternoon, about 6 months after the fateful day in the judge's chambers, Clara came to Liam's new house to pick up the children. She arrived not in a chauffeured sedan, but in a modest second-hand car. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater. Her face was less made up, and the lines of stress and unhappiness that had been etched around her eyes were beginning to soften. She found Liam in the backyard with Leo and Maya, the three of them covered in dirt, planting a vegetable garden. They were laughing. It was a sound she hadn't heard, a genuine, uncomplicated joy in a very long time. She stood by the back door watching them. Liam looked up and saw her. He didn't smile, but his expression was not unkind. He excused himself from the children and walked over to her. "The garden is looking good," she said, her voice quiet. "The kids are enjoying it," he replied. "Leo has a real talent for weeding." They stood in silence for a moment. It wasn't the tense, angry silence of their old life. It was a different kind of silence, one filled with unspoken history, but also, perhaps, a glimmer of peace. "I'm working," Clara said suddenly, "at an art gallery. Just as a gallery assistant, it's not glamorous, but I like it. I'm learning things." "That's good, Clara," Liam said, and he meant it. "I'm glad." "Liam," she started, and her voice broke. She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry for everything. I was a fool. I was a monster. I see that now. I let my father's ideas about success and worth poison everything. I had everything a person could ever want, and I threw it away because I was too blind to see it." Tears streamed down her face, and this time, they were not tears of self-pity or hysteria. They were tears of genuine, profound regret. Liam handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. He looked at her, at the woman who had caused him so much pain, and he felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded. There was only a quiet sense of closure. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "It means something. For the kids' sake, I hope you find a way to be happy. Genuinely happy." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm trying, one day at a time." She took the children for the afternoon, and as Liam watched them drive away, he felt a sense of finality. The war was truly over. He had not only won, but he had managed to do so without losing his soul. He had maintained his integrity, protected his children, and in the end, had even created the conditions for his former wife to perhaps one day become a better person. He went back to his garden, the warm earth crumbling in his hands. He thought about the word Richard had thrown at him at that last dinner: legacy. Richard had thought legacy was about steel and money and power. He had been wrong. Legacy wasn't something you built for yourself. It was what you left behind in others. It was in the laughter of his children, in the quiet strength of the hospitals and community centers he had designed, in the second chance he had given to hundreds of employees at a failing company. And it was in the difficult, painful, but necessary lesson he had been forced to teach the woman he once loved. That true worth has nothing to do with what you have and everything to do with who you are. The sun was warm on his back, and for the first time in a very long time, Liam Collins felt completely and utterly at peace. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity and self-respect are not things that can be given or taken away by others. They are forged in the fires of our own integrity. Liam's quiet strength and unwavering principles were his true wealth, a fortune that Clara and Richard, for all their money, could never understand. He showed us that the greatest victory is not in crushing your enemies, but in rising above the conflict without sacrificing your own moral compass. He sought not revenge, but justice. And in doing so, he not only saved himself and his children, but he created an opportunity for redemption for the very people who tried to destroy him. What do you think? Was Liam too generous in the end, or did he handle it perfectly? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of quiet triumph resonated with you, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of integrity. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.